3. When a bomb hit the fourth innermost citadel of the China Gate, where his regiment's command post had been stationed for the last several weeks, Colonel Ling was on the phone with General Tang Shenzhi, the commander of Nanking garrison, begging for direct area support. He felt a sudden wave of searing heat, a piercing ringing in his ears, and his body lifted into the air, numb, weightless, drifting waywardly before falling into a stupendous pit of darkness only a second later. Earlier that morning, Colonel Ling had observed a large number of Japanese troops amassing less than a kilometer from the city wall, while column upon column of tanks rumbling down willow-lined country roads to take their places just outside the city. In the midst of the massive commotion in the distance, Ling spotted a Japanese commander astride a tall ebony horse. Through his binoculars, Ling could see a cold yet fiery glimmer smoldering behind a pair of gold-rimmed glasses. The small squarish mustache between the commander's nose and tightened lips and the shoulder strap on the wool uniform gave him away. The turtle son must be a general. Soon the brisk movements of Japanese troops and tanks kicked up a cloud of dust that blocked out the early morning sunshine and made the air too oppressive for Ling to breathe. General Tang, Ling said after reporting what he saw to the general over the phone. Today is the day Nanking stands or falls. You're telling me, the general barked. But what do you need to ensure that the capital stands? Air support, sir. Dropping a few bombs on those damn Japs would be a big help. You know damn well, brother Guang, I can't give you that. The Generalissimo has taken the entire Air Corps with him to Chongqing. That was 4 days ago, remember? I'll be damned if I don't, but I need area support, sir. Ling swallowed whatever was on the tip of his tongue. And even if the entire Air Corps had stayed, General Tang continued, his tone tinged with a sickening sense of resignation, that would amount to no more than 4 or 5 squadrons, you know, and it would be no match to the Japs any way you want to play it. So improvise the best you can. Improvise with what? Those old, rusty anti-aircraft guns? He would be kowtowing to Lord Buddha if they could punch a few holes in the wings of Japs' warplanes. Colonel Ling, along with a dozen other hardcore mid-level field officers, had sat in the meeting of the ranking generals and the German military advisors called by the Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek himself in mid-November to discuss the defense of the capital. Strategically speaking, General Li Zongren, commander of the 5th War Zone, was among the first to speak. Nanking is a dead end. The enemy could surround it from the east, the south, the west, while to the north the Yangtze River cuts off any possibility of retreat. He paused and then continued. We may have some advantage in sheer numbers, but we have just suffered a major defeat in Shanghai, and our firepower is far inferior to that of the Japanese. Therefore, it is my humble opinion that it would be impossible for us to fight an enemy who is enormously better armed and whose morale is at its peak right now. General Alexander von Falkenhausen, the chief German advisor, nodded in agreement. We have several elite divisions under training by our capable, experienced advisors, he said slowly, eyeing everyone at the huge conference table. These divisions can hold their own against the best of the Japanese. However, we need at least 10 or 20 more such divisions, and we need hundreds more well-trained, battle-hardened fighter pilots. Since we do not have these luxuries, and given the grim situation as aptly analyzed by General Li, I have serious reservations that an all-out defense of the capital would be the wise course of action. I really wish our advisors' corps had been given more time. Time, just a few more years. The conference room was unsettlingly quiet. Nobody else said anything for a minute or two. That's it? Just leave the capital on a silver platter for the Japs to come and take? A disheartened Ling couldn't help wondering. General Tang Shenzhi, executive chief of the central government's Military Affairs Committee, stood up to speak. The enemy is approaching the nation's capital and will be at the feet of the city walls any day now. As all of you know, the capital is also the site of the mausoleum of Dr. Sun Yat-sen, our national father. If when the enemy is at our door with swords, machine guns, and bombs, and all we do is pack up and run for our lives, leaving the hallowed grounds to be trampled by the enemy, how can we account for ourselves before the soul of the national father in heaven? General Tang paused, turned his eyes to the head of the mahogany table, then continued tremulously. How can we ever account for ourselves before the supreme leader of our nation who has led us from victory to victory since the northern expeditions? I, for one, would rather defend Nanking to the last and fight the enemy to the death. From the corner where he was sitting, Colonel Ling saw a barely perceptible twitch in the Generalissimo's face. Jiang himself then stood up slowly, gave his top generals and the German advisers a cursory glance before turning his gaze outside the window. I must concur with Brother Shenzhi, Jiang began deliberately in his thick Zhejiang accent. We should defend the capital to the last drop of our blood. Failing this, I would have no face to meet the national father in heaven. I would be unworthy of my ancestors, the trust that 400 million compatriots have placed in me. My name would be crucified and spat on in perpetuity. The Generalissimo paused, turned his gaze back into the conference room, which had become deathly quiet. However, Jiang continued, in the event that the central government has to evacuate, given the enemy's obvious superiority in firepower, who will stay and command the defense? Jiang scanned the faces of the top generals one by one. It was excruciating. Frozen in their seats, the generals kept their eyes to their notebooks on the table, or whatever happened to be in the path of their vision at that moment. How pathetic! Ling remembered thinking to himself. Where is the fighting spirit we have shown in Shanghai, hidden by dogs? Having made a complete tour around the table, Jiang's eyes returned to the face of General Tang and stayed there. Brother Shenzhi, Jiang lowered his voice as if only the two of them were in the room. As if a bolt of electricity shot up his back, Tang straightened himself with a sudden jerky movement. It looks like it's either you or me. Jiang let that sentence hang in midair and sat down. With a quivering hand, General Tang took out a white handkerchief and dabbed the sweat glistening on his forehead. The Generalissimo is the supreme leader of China, Tang stuttered. The future of our nation depends on his wise leadership and personal safety. How could Shenzhi let the Generalissimo stay? Ling remembered thinking it rather odd. What was the Generalissimo up to? He and Tang had never been close or trusted each other. Although Tang had supported Jiang's northern expedition to wipe out the feudal warlords 10 years ago, there had been no love lost between the two. In fact, Tang had been exiled twice from China as a result of their power struggles. Why had Jiang chosen Tang? Another one of Jiang's brilliant moves? If the defense turned out to be successful, a near impossibility given the circumstances, Jiang would be in a position to take the credit for having appointed the right general to command the defense. If Nanking fell, a virtual certainty, Jiang would not have to shed a single tear when it came to sacrificing a convenient scapegoat. It was wrong of you to second-guess the Generalissimo at such a time, Ling had told himself. After all, the survival of the capital, of the whole nation for that matter, is at stake. Thus, this morning, when bombs began to fall again on the China Gate, when the enemy's cannons and tanks roared, Colonel Ling could feel the very foundations of the city walls shake. In a moment of anger and despair, he had grasped the phone frantically and called General Tang for air support, even though he knew that the entire Air Corps was already in Chongqing, which had now become the wartime capital of China. How about artillery support then? Ling was still shouting into the phone when he was being tossed into the air like a lone, sun-scorched leaf caught in a gust of wind. Ling felt dazed, as if perhaps he had already been reincarnated. His consciousness, which had deserted his body, was still falling into an icy, gaping hole. He wanted to stop falling. It was too dark, too cold down there. Help me. It was a familiar voice begging weakly. It was drowned out by eerie, deafening echoes all around the feathery consciousness of his former self. Colonel! Another voice called anxiously. Colonel, we're getting you to the hospital. The hospital? Ling again heard the familiar voice mumbling. You are hurt, came the breathless reply by his side. Oh, which hospital? Hadn't all the hospitals been evacuated to? The university hospital. It may still be open. The other voice sounded familiar too. Whose was it? Slowly rising, the dizzied consciousness now struggled to see. Colonel Ling now felt his head pounding and discovered it was difficult to breathe. He could see a stretch of the sky, nebulous, frequented by billowing clouds of the thick smoke and burned tree branches. The world around him moaned and shook spasmodically as if caught in waves of nausea. The other familiar voice had come from the face of someone running alongside of his stretcher. Little Zhao. The kid looked like he had just crawled back from death, his face caked with smoke and dust. He gave the colonel a toothy grin. Why did the kid stay behind? Ling could not recall. Helen, my little girl, hasn't evacuated either. That thought hit him hard. Dad? He seemed to hear Helen asking in a worried voice. What's happened to you? Why are you still in Nanking? He had asked Helen about a week ago when he visited Jingling College. Why haven't you gone to Changsha to join your mom or little brother, as I've told you so many times? I'm not going anywhere, replied Helen. Our college is in the safety zone. I will be okay. Besides, I want to help Miss Hua take care of the refugees. Miss Hua, the American professor he had known since when? But you are a young woman. Don't you trust me, Dad? A hurt expression appeared on Helen's face. I know how to take care of myself. You are as stubborn as you, of course. Helen giggled, like when she was still Daddy's little girl. She certainly knew how to handle her dad. Besides, she said, I want to stay closer to Peng Fei, her husband, that young, handsome captain in the Air Corps. He had left Nanking with the Generalissimo too. Dad, a shy smile appeared on Helen's face. Yes, I have something to tell you. Better be something good, he mumbled in his mind. You'll be grandpa soon. What? Me? A grandpa? But she was still his little girl. He didn't want that to change. Not yet. How soon? He asked, his eyes falling unwittingly on his daughter's belly. Be patient, Dad. You'll have to wait for another 6 or 7 months. That's still very soon. I'm too young to, he blurted out in protest. Colonel, little Zhao was running breathlessly alongside the stretcher. You'll be okay. We're just a couple of minutes away from the hospital. How is everybody else? Ling asked. I don't know. It's bad, Colonel. Really bad. I did see Captain Wang and a bunch of his soldiers, though. They stumbled out of the smoke right before the front citadel tumbled down. Captain Wang Baozi. What a temper he had, like a pile of dry, thorny branches under a brutal summer sun. Just a spark from a match, and it will blow up in flames. But what a damn good soldier. And the best company commander in his entire regiment. His thoughts came back to Helen again. Why on earth had she chosen to stay? Why had he, Colonel Ling, been defending Nanking as if it were his own hometown? It might have something to do with his first visit to the city 10 years ago. He was a young second lieutenant of a triumphant Northern Expedition Army entering the famed city of Nanking. He remembered experiencing something close to a homecoming, as if he had been here in a dream, in another incarnation of his, a long time before. Every street, every tree, every building, and every shop looked thrillingly familiar. Even the air had an intoxicating familiarity to it, and just hearing people talk in that open, hearty Nanking accent would stir up something deep inside him. He found it puzzling. Was that why, even back then, he had intervened angrily whenever he saw soldiers looting and stealing from the folks here? Of course, there was Helen, his little girl, who had blossomed into a fine, young, modern woman here. 4 years of Jilin College and the difference it had made. Helen would be safe, he assured himself. He too was safe for now. Yet what would befall Nanking once the Japs poured into the city? His heart ached dully at the thought. "We're almost..." Little Zhao didn't have time to finish the sentence. An explosion nearby drowned him out. Colonel Ling was tossed into the air again, and his consciousness, cut off from his body yet again, dived once more into a deep black